Okay, I think we can get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Audrey Bullis, and I'm the Senior Programs and Communications Associate at the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our newest virtual panel, Sudan in Conflict, the Impact of International Policy and the Way Forward, that we at the Tahrir Institute are privileged to host today. Sudan's warring generals have subjected the country to a brutal conflict for nearly 3 months with no end in sight. That each announced ceasefire collapsed in a matter of hours came as no surprise, as none of the previous ceasefires brokered by the United States and Saudi Arabia have held for long, and both generals remain firmly convinced of their ability to secure a military victory. Local actors on the ground have been providing assistance to citizens caught in the crossfire, but with precious few resources. Various international actors have confessed that they were wrong for not working more closely with the resistance committees and supporting their demands in the years leading up to the conflict, and yet there's still been no change of policy. Furthermore, the international community has still not fully mobilized its leverage and mechanisms to hold the warring generals to account, end the conflict, and facilitate humanitarian assistance to the Sudanese people. So today's discussion will delve into Sudan's ongoing conflict, the role of the international community, and how global actors can change the course of action on the ground and help the Sudanese people realize their aspirations for a peaceful and democratic country. Before we begin, I just want to share a few quick reminders. As always, today's conversation is being recorded and will be shared widely after the panel. You can follow along and live tweet with us using the hashtag #TimeUpEvents, and we invite and encourage our audience to submit questions using Zoom's Q&A function at any time. So without any further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Majdi Amin. Majdi is a member of TimeUp's Board of Advisors. He's a Sudanese American adjunct professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and managing partner of African Renaissance Partners. Majdi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, Team Up, for organizing this, and thank you, everyone who's joined. Before getting started, I just want to acknowledge, we're all living through a very traumatic time. We've all had family members affected. We've had personally have been affected in many cases. You all see what's happening. If you haven't experienced it personally, you see it. And those who work on Sudan, those who are Sudanese, and those who in any way have been part of this, what was on track to be a very wonderful story, in a way are experiencing this trauma. I just want to remind everybody just to take care of themselves. This will take time, but there will be a reconstruction phase where we hope to build Sudan back even better, to learn from all of what's happened. And that will depend on people. That will depend on people and ideas, and efforts and resilience. And so that all starts with you just taking care of yourselves and know that this is what everybody's experiencing, and it's okay. If you need to reach out and get help, because you're going to be needed later. So let me get started. What I'd like to do is just introduce quickly the speakers who are coming in. We think a really excellent panel, and I really hope this is going to be a very valuable conversation and comments, speaking to where we are in this process and highlighting some of the mistakes or some of the ways that we can redirect some of our efforts going forward. We'll start by introducing Reem Abbas. She's a non-resident fellow at TMAP focusing on land, conflict, and resources in Sudan. She's also the Institute's first Mohamed Hamdan Fellow. We have Hamid Khalifallah. He's a former non-resident fellow of TMAP focusing on inclusive governance and mobilization. He's a development practitioner, research and policy analyst. He's now working as a program officer at the Institute for Democracy and Electoral Analysis, supporting Sudan's democratic transition. And I think I remember he wrote something within days before the conflict broke out, and I think picked up some key issues with the framework agreement that I think were quite insightful. We have Muzna Al-Hajj. She's a political analyst, an activist, women and youth political participation advocate, and she is a member of the Khartoum Resistance Committee, the rapporteur and English language spokesperson of the Khartoum East Resistance Committee coordinating body. And finally, and certainly not least, we have Abdullah Hussein, a good friend and a civil society activist in the Darfur Activism Network, a researcher in local language from the Darfur region, very closely witnessed what is happening and bring some of that picture to us. He holds a master's degree in peace and development studies. So let's go ahead and get started with the questions. I would like to start with Muzna. Let's paint a picture for us how Sudan has been affected. You were a member and spokesperson for the Khartoum East Resistance Committees. And recently, amid the weakening presence of the state in many areas, the resistance committees and other civil society actors have really become the primary provider of basic services. Can you tell us how Khartoum has been affected after months? We just passed 100 days of conflict, and how the resistance committees have really responded amid this conflict.
Okay, hello Majdi, and thank you for having me. So since the beginning of the war, Khartoum has been the main battlefield of this war. Beside West Darfur state, it's the state that's witnessing the worst forms of violence and attacks. And these attacks, unfortunately, mainly happening at most of the vital entities, especially military entities and RSF offices and the airport and other important facilities are all built around residential neighborhoods or within them. And this is why the neighborhoods are targeted with these attacks. I would also say that because obviously, like we all know and following, RSF is occupying the citizens' houses. And this is actually what caused Khartoum to be in this dire situation. I would say, of course, since the first days of this war, main electricity, power, and water plants were destroyed and affected, and nearly 90 medical facilities went out of service. Leaving Khartoumians with very few. And then, of course, also the functioning medical institutions are attacked regularly by SAF and RSF for different reasons. And of course, besides that, there's steady lack in food, drinking water, and medications. I would say that 2 weeks into the war, the resistance committees had sort of an emergency response, and this emergency response was establishing what's called emergency rooms. And these emergency rooms actually oversees many tasks. First of all, they provide medical aid. Whether this medical aid in forms of providing aid to the injured or evacuating them with ambulances to hospitals. Also, this medical aid takes other forms, as we will see later, like psychological support. Part of the medical aid that they provide is also the maintenance. They perform in hospitals and health centers that are not functioning to make them able to accommodate all the cases of the people who come injured or even who have other chronic illnesses. They would also provide medications for people with chronic illnesses. They would at least at the first part of the war, I would say they worked in evacuating and relocating families who were fleeing the dangerous neighborhoods. Beside that, of course, they are still actively engaged in looking for missing people or cases of arbitrary disappearances. I would say they would also provide food for those who are in need within the neighborhoods. And this activity emerged in forming these public kitchens, where basically they just cook food in open areas and give food to everyone, no questions asked. And I think that's a really good model when some people silently suffer from starvation in the light of lack of food and drinking water and so on. Also in the states where Sudanese people actually fled Khartoum to these states, they founded shelters in collaboration with other civil society actors in these states. They founded shelters for the internally displaced people, and they are running these shelters. I would say more or less they also work on fixing electricity and power lines within the neighborhoods, or at least get the technicians to do that. At least I know of one neighborhood where there is a women response room that was founded, which provides sanitary pads, painkillers, and pregnancy vitamins for women. These, at least the things are that I can think of off top of my head that resistance committees have founded during this war.
Oh, that's so impressive. We can all take pride in what they've done and what they continue to do, and just amazing in the context of conflict to be able to do really, really true benefit for people. I'm wondering, it's such a tall order. What are the challenges they face? What are the gaps or resources, and what other challenges they have in doing what they're doing?
I think the RCs generally, in their quest for finding a better situation during this war, they face multiple challenges. First of all, of course, the overall state of insecurity, the fact that they have to navigate their ways around the insecure streets, that they could be attacked, that it could be targeted, that they could be shelled, and all of that. Plus, of course, dealing with all the damaged infrastructure and trying to actually make up, at least provide some of the services under the given situation. Of course, the lack of supply in medications and food and clean water, all of these challenges they have to deal with. But I would say like the most pressing and critical challenge is related to their own personal security. We know and hear and read about stories of how resistance committees are being attacked, being kidnapped, being detained, and even being killed by the two warring parties. I would say at least we know that resistance committees members within their neighborhoods were killed by RSF while they were trying to build barricades or dig trenches, or even when they resisted robberies. And in some states, for example, the resistance committees who are overseeing shelters, these shelters were raided by SAF, by the police, by the intelligence, and they just detained everyone because they are resistance committees. So this means clearly that being a resistance committee is an accusation for them. And I think the problem is not just the fact that they are active in this time, but the problem is I personally believe that one of the motivations for this war is basically to kill the revolution and to silence the resistance. And for SAF and RSF to see that the revolution and the resistance is still alive under these dire circumstances, this is very alarming for them. Also, these authorities have fear when they say Sudanese communities and everyday people are in control of their resources, in control of their communities, and governing themselves. This means that they, by default, do not need this authority. And I think that simply SAF and RSF really don't care about the Sudanese people's lives, and they don't necessarily are not pleased by seeing that the Sudanese people's life are being easier by a group like resistance committees, or even their lives are being saved by these active groups.
It's just so impressive, and yet also so in a way dire, that those who are saving people and doing their utmost are actually being attacked at the same time. I want to continue, given the focus on the Resistance Committee, with al-Adha. Al-Adha, amid the rising violence and hostilities that we've seen in Sudan overall, the Darfur specific targeted violence is coming back into the picture, reminding us of decades-long genocide and systematically targeted against the non-Arab Sudanese tribes. Now we've seen reports of killings, including of the governor, arson and displacement of Janina. We've seen things in West Darfur, North Darfur, and there seems to be little to no accountability beyond words of condemnation. Can you paint a picture of what's happening on the ground there in Darfur, and what's the fate of the area why is the fate of Darfur so crucial for Sudan and its path forward as a whole?
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Magdi, and also let me to thank the Tahrir Institute for giving me this chance to participate on this panel. Really, what is going on now in Darfur, it's reminding us what has been done since 2003. And for me, I think the conflict in Darfur has taken a different narrative than the other region in Sudan now. Because if we just depend on the saying of some speakers that speak behalf of the RSF, what they are saying that just they are fighting against the former regime and the stuff. But unfortunately in Darfur, the narrative, it is different. The narrative, it is the same narrative that has been brought by the former regime that based on the ethnic killing or targeting the people based on their ethnicity. So, and this is well clear that if we give a look to the map of hot areas in Darfur, for example, if we just look on the West Darfur, Genena, and al-Masri, those areas are the area that are occupied with al-Masalit, which is non-Arab group, and also in North Darfur we have Kutum and Tawila that has witnessed like a very tough and rough violences against the civilian. Also, those areas are occupied by 4 community, and it is a non-Arab non-Arab tribe. Also in Central Darfur, what is going on now in Zanigi, it is well clear, and also in South Darfur, there is a clash in Kas, and Kas it is like a 4 community. So there is a targeting for a specific community that are non-Arab, and this is the same narrative that that was working on the 2003. So there is no change. So what they are saying, especially the rapid support forces, it is a fake, because their narrative might be that in Khartoum, yeah, they are fighting against the SAF, but unfortunately in Darfur it is totally different. And what is like approving by say we have like a one state that up to now there is no one single gun has been released like in at the end, and that's why, because at the end it is occupied by the Arab groups. So that's why they keep their state safe. And also there is a former regime member in the DN, and also there is a SAF component there, and but there is no fighting. So the narrative in Darfur, it's like well clear, and it's need a clear discussion to reel out what is there, because when we come back on the case of the Genena, we will realize that this conflict has a historical root that since 18th and 19th, because the reason behind all it is a land, because the central government, they create some like a native administrative for the Arab group. And as we know in Darfur, in order to have like a native administrative so you need to hold a land. So a land is belong to the some group, but the government, the former government, create many what we call nadara within the land of the Masalit. So this is the main root causes of the conflict that witnessing now in Darfur. And also there is like a regional power or regional power that they have some interest on the land, because those areas are very rich with resources. So they are also they having like a hidden agenda on that one. So they imposing or like accelerating what is going on now in Darfur. So all these are resulted on the last war that has been done during the Khartoum War. So it result with like 5,000 innocent people has been killed, and there is many of them they flee from their land to go as a refugee in Chad. Also, we realize that there is like a systematic killing within the community leaders and activists, and also there's a kidnapping some businessman, and then they especially the RSF kidnap many businessmen, especially in Dalinji. Like 8 businessmen has been kidnapped, and then they require from their family to pay a sum of money in order to release them. And also in Guinea, there is many cases. So also those cases are not like reflected in the media, because since the war escalated in Sudan, the RSF cut off all tool of communications in 2 states, which is South Darfur, which is the Central Darfur and the West Darfur, and because they don't want the other people to monitor what is going on, the violation that are going on. So yes, they keep also those area up to date, very isolated, and there is a big mass of violations is running now. So all those issues we needed like to bring it on all discussion that are going concerning to the Sudan, because the problem of Darfur, it is a problem of Sudan. Unless we solve this issue in Darfur, it is a little bit difficult for Sudan to have a peace. So we need like to consider this, because it is a part of the problem or part of insecurity now are going in all of Sudan. It is rooted here in Darfur. So we need like to focus on issue of Darfur, and issue of Darfur only can be solved by by the accountability, because we need to account those whom committing the crime, especially the general whom now leading the war. And also we need to include what the crime that has been committed during the 2003. And also what I want to mention that Guinea specifically, even as since 2003, he is still having like many massacres, and even during the former regime, or during the transitional government that led by Mr. Hamodok, Guinea witnesses like 2 wars, which is in Crindon 1 and Crindon 2, that attack has been made by the RSF to the IDPs camp in Guinea. So Guinea has a very longest history of the war in Darfur, and this is only because because there is no accountability, because the two cases of the Clinton 1 and Clinton 2 was well clear for everyone, even the party of the government. Those who comment that massacre, they well known by everyone, but unfortunately, due to the political reason that we don't know, the transitional government didn't take any clear step for the to account those who attack the IDP camps. So also,
Abdullah, I want to come back to you on some questions, but I want to also get the other panelists involved, and then we would have I think time for another round. And also, there's some questions that are starting to come in, and I want to make sure that we get some of those questions that are in the Q&A of those who are participating online. And you've mentioned a few things that I want to make sure that we focus on. One, if there's any clear case of a lack of accountability and how that can then come back to really haunt us. And in fact, the Darfur conflict that was not fully resolved, and there was not enough accountability. And now we see what's happened to the country. I think that's quite evident. But also, you said a number of things about land, and I think we should dig in a little bit further on that. You've painted a very clear picture of that very dire situation in the conflict, but I think we want to just come back to a few key things and go in a bit deeper. One of the things you mentioned was the question of land, and I'd like to turn to Reem. I think first of all, you started this week. I think this week you issued a paper, and I just did review it, and it was pretty well researched, and it looked closely at the RSF and how it came to be and how it's playing a key role in Sudan's economy, its politics, security. I'm wondering if you can explain a little bit more, share some of your insights on how this RSF is funded, what's its financial network look like, and what are the implications that this network has for its ability to continue this conflict and its longevity in Sudan.
Thank you, Mehdi, and thank you to Time for this platform. And thanks to colleagues for their insights. They were very good. So in 2019, and this is really when this all started, when the late Egyptian journalist Mohamed Abdel Fattah, I'm the first person to carry this fellowship in his name. He co-authored a very important investigation on the financial networks of the RSF. And he almost gave us a framework of like what to do. So he followed the money using different sources, and then how do you, after you follow the money, how do you tackle this to disempower the RSF? Because he saw them as one of the hurdles, or his investigative piece showed that it was one of the main hurdles to democratic transformation in Sudan. So I revisited that research to understand what's happening right now, and really just focusing on the financial networks of the RSF, because they are a large entity, one of the largest employers in Sudan, and they have a lot of wealth. And this is really because the RSF, it's basically about the troops, and the troops, this is where Hemedti derives his political power from, and the money. And they need this money to keep things floating. They need this money to buy off more people, and they need this money to keep this, tens of thousands of soldiers on the payroll. But let's really look at how they make money, or their financial networks. So initially, when it was founded in 2012 and 2013, the RSF was bankrolled, through generous support by the ousted, dictator Omar al-Bashir, and because it was managed directly under the presidency, actually, at the time, not under SAF. So al-Bashir, he gave them a very important source of income, other than the state, of course, which is to get control over Jabal Amir, which is Jabal Amir, a mountain it's one of the most important and strategic gold mining locations in Sudan. And it brings in, at some point, it was estimated that it brings in over $50 million a year. So they got Jebel Amir, and then this was done. But then let's also look at one of the quotes that was featured in the investigation that was co-authored by Mohammed Abul Ghait, and and in which Hemedti himself was quoted saying on how the RSF makes money. So he said, people ask, where do we, quote unquote, the RSF brings this money from? We have the salaries of our troops fighting abroad, quote unquote, and our gold investments, money from gold and other investments. So let's kind of look at the different things that he listed, or the different sources of income that he talked about. So fighting abroad, in this sense, he means RSF soldiers fighting in the Saudi-led alliance or coalition in Yemen. So at some point, the RSF, around 2016 and 2017, the RSF had like 40,000 soldiers fighting in Yemen. Okay, there were a smaller like numbers fighting in Libya, but one of their main sources of income was Yemen. Heavily bankrolled by the Saudi-UAE alliance, they made a lot of money. So this is number one. The second thing is gold investment. Of course, we talked about Jebel Amir. It's very, very lucrative, and also other mining sites. The third thing is other investments. So they invest in construction in different parts, and also security companies, okay? And let's also remember that the RSF doesn't only invest in Sudan, they have, different investments all over the Sahel region. So let's explore closely. So Yemen, like I said, 40,000 soldiers in Yemen. So Hemedti took a huge cut of this money. So the soldiers would make considerable income, over like $22,000 at least for 6 months of deployment. Compared, of course, at the time, the monthly wage in Sudan was, I think, something like $190, so less than $200. And this is why people were fighting, and this is true. People were fighting, especially young men were fighting to join the RSF to get deployed to Yemen, because, they wanted to make the money in a country where a lot of young people are jobless. Gold, based on reports, Jebel Amir, like I said, generated a lot of money, but then the RSF had important mining sites across Sudan, in the Blue Nile region, in River Nile, in different parts, also in Darfur. So, but then by 2019, Hemedti basically had power, he had money, and he had an army. And he got even more power because the Constitutional Declaration of 2019 legitimized the RSF and legitimized it as a separate force other than the Sudan Armed Forces. And that year, he really showed us what he's all about, and he showed us his money because he deposited over $1 billion into the Central Bank of Sudan to pay for salaries and pay for basic necessities. And at the time, he was going to different, like sectors, like going to the airport, going to teachers, going to different professional sectors, and basically paying them their delayed salaries. So this is really critical because, like I said in the beginning, the RSF, they need their army, they need to keep it on the payroll, and they need money to keep basically investing and to keep expanding and monopolizing power. So what happened is that his sources of income started shrinking, and this is what I talk about in the article. So the different kind of sources of income, whether it's the gold and Yemen, started shrinking. So due to local and also regional dynamics. So for example, at some point, so in 2019 and 2020, the Yemen conflict was coming to was not coming to an end, but it was coming to a point where they just didn't need as many ground forces. So the troops went from 40,000 to 10K in just like a span of a few months. So this was lost. Gold, the army also has a lot of mining sites, so he did not really manage to monopolize the gold industry. He had other companies, but they were not making as much money. So basically, after talking about the different funding, pools that he had, it became clear that by 2021, of course, after the coup happened and the money and the country was entering into a very difficult economic crisis, it became clear that his sources of income, due to what's happening in Sudan and due to what was happening regionally, it was just shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. So he needed more money to fund his troops. He needed more money to fund his very ambitious political project. And I think this is one of the reasons why the war came to happen.
Fascinating take. Well, first of all, let's just also be clear that it's not only RSF, but also SAF that has lots of extensive business, non-military activities, and that both, when you try to run a state and you have the security sector that's unaccountable to it, one of the key things that needed to be done was change that dynamic. And it's so distorted that, as you were saying, RSF is, instead of being funded by the government, is funding the government and paying teachers and things. That is just such a distorted picture. But just to be clear, it's not only RSF, it's both and others as well. But you've also painted a picture where those resource flows, or at least the obligations, started to outstrip, and maybe that in part the conflict was driven by the need to continue to expand financially as well as politically. That's fascinating, and those who you can find the paper on the TIMEP website. Thank you, Reem. I wanted to turn to Hamid. So we've seen news about the talks that are happening. There's the Saudi track. There's what's happening in IGAD. You have talks going on right now in Egypt. They're all aimed at either brokering ceasefires or calling for comprehensive negotiations to stop the war, but also some of them are about the democratic transition, or at least the political process. And the U.S. is a key sponsor, at least in some of these talks. Why do you think none of these efforts are getting anywhere? What they're not achieving their results? And so what are some of the issues with how international engagement is happening in your view, and what kind of approach to the conflict and to the main combatants that should be taken that we haven't already seen?
Thank you so much, Majdi, and thanks to TIMEP for having me. I will start by saying that I think all mediation efforts in the past few months, just under 4 months now, have failed because the approach is basically flawed and problematic. So basically, globally, various scholars and peacemaking experts have been arguing that the standard peacemaking formula has largely failed all over the world, which goes by engaging, the armed actors or the warring parties to secure a ceasefire, and then rushing into a political process that centralizes them, actually, the same armed actors, into an interim power sharing agreement. And then at the end of the process, it brings on board civilian actors. This has been the classic, formula that is followed by peacemakers, and it continued to fail. And this formula basically rewards violence, and it undervalues civil politics. So this is why it's very problematic. Now, zooming into the Sudanese context, not only the country is not an exception to the failure of this traditional peacemaking formula, but this same formula has been tested in Sudan over the past 4 years, and it didn't work, and it created so many problems. And now, unfortunately, this very same formula is being followed by the mediators, particularly in the Jeddah platform, for instance. And as we all know by now, that platform has failed in even achieving the bare minimum of cessation of hostilities on humanitarian grounds. So I think the conveners of the platform must appreciate that both actors, actually, the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces, are engaging in these talks for tactical reasons, and their current delegates in Jeddah, they do not have any authority or mandate to commit to any of these agreements. So basically, it's pointless in my opinion, and continuing with the same approach is not going to yield any different results. In fact, all efforts that are being invested in making this approach work, the traditional peacemaking formula, these are efforts stolen from other approaches that could have better chances at ending the war and putting, Sudan on a path of a civilian-centric, peaceful, and democratic transition, and so on. So the international community has been saying that there should be a political process led by Sudanese civilians. However, we are yet to see any Sudanese civilians being meaningfully included in these discussions so far. So this needs to change immediately, in my opinion. And I will come back later in the discussion today to talk about the issues of including civilian voices and what does it mean in more practical terms. Moreover, I think the fragmentation of initiatives by obviously different international and regional actors is not helpful at all. Right now, these different initiatives seem to be competing instead of coordinating their efforts towards a unified process. And that basically allows the warring factions to evade these talks and agreements. It basically gives them excuses and so on. And different actors currently engaged in the mediation initiatives are in possession of different leverages, and they also often have conflicting biases. And we have seen how different actors, the different warring factions have reacted differently to different initiatives according to these biases. However, I think it's essential for these initiatives to be coordinated, for this leverage or these different leverages to be used properly, but also to neutralize these different biases, which we must acknowledge that they exist, but they need to be neutralized by this coordination. Furthermore, I think there's an urgent need for international community, particularly Western governments and transnational institutions, to deal with the war in Sudan with the urgency that it needs. So despite Sudan's ongoing armed conflict being deeply rooted in Sudan's political economy, it has substantial transnational linkages and implications. Reem just spoke about, the transnational financial links of the Rapid Support Forces, and as you added, Hemedti, SAF also has similar links and so on. So we know that both factions have evident external support from other regional governments. So all diplomatic, and that's why I think all diplomatic tools must be deployed immediately to target these external links. We have now seen some overdue sanctions getting rolled out by the US and the UK and potentially the EU as well, but that is not enough. I think we are yet to see any serious pressures being exerted on external supporters of the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese Armed Forces. And basically, I think cutting their transnational supplies and interests would be a very powerful tool to make them stop fighting. And of course, these tools, sanctions and others cannot be sought independently. They must be sought strategically as part of a comprehensive package. The last thing that I would say now, I think, diplomatic action towards Sudan, we need to see a radical change in that, and support to the Sudanese civilians and to Sudan's historic revolution. At this point, it needs to move past being, merely lip service and to become more, actual action and policies. I will stop here for now.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more that we need much better, much more effective focus beyond lip service on those actors, as Muzna was saying, that are really the ones that are saving lives and delivering services and not destroying. What we've seen from this conflict has set back the country economically, I would say, decades. Really, profoundly impacts the future viability of the economy. But again, let me go. You mentioned you wanted to come back for a little bit further detail, and I would like to go ahead and come back to some of the issues that were raised in our first round. So, Reem, Abdallah mentioned the important issue of land, and I would want to see if you've done some work on this. How is the RSF's land commission, where they've taken over really massive amounts of land in North Sudan, not only in Darfur, but across the country, but also displaced populations out of Darfur. How is that affecting communities? And can you explain a little bit more about how that's happening?
Yes, and I think Abdullah spoke very clearly when it comes to the land issue in Darfur. If we talk about the RSF's land commission, so last year in April 2022, the RSF established a land commission, okay? And it caused some kind of controversy, but then it kind of died down because no one really talked about it after that. But when I looked at the decree, I found it has a number of objectives, but three of them were just very interesting to me. So the first one, the objective is to basically look at the land and the property that belongs to the RSF already and register it in the name of the quote unquote leadership of the RSF. I thought that was interesting. The second point, they said, get permits for more land distribution plans for RSF officers and soldiers in all the states of Sudan. So to do some kind of housing plans for their, or housing schemes for their soldiers and so on. The third is to get permits for new land or take over new land in the name of the, again, leadership of the RSF, okay? So is this like the Dagalo brothers, or like, what do they mean by the leadership of the RSF? It was not very clear. So in an investigation that I found, Beam's report, they said that the commission, the way they framed it is that it's perhaps an attempt to legitimize the RSF's control of many premises that they now occupy that previously belonged to the National Security Service. So what happened is 2019, we saw the rise of the RSF because they were given an opportunity to take over premises or locations or property and also equipment and so on that previously belonged to the National Security Service. Okay, so National Security Service was shrunk, the RSF expanded, in this platform. So they took over a lot of basically premises in very strategic, locations in Khartoum and beyond. And so they saw it as a way to kind of legitimize this process of them taking over and occupying the premises of the previous of the premises of the National Security Service, and also to invest in property, because property is a very secure investment in Sudan. Maybe it was. I mean, now after the war, things have changed, but it was a very secure and lucrative investment in Sudan because land is expensive. So the problem is at the time is that the RSF has already taken a lot of land, whether it's in Darfur, whether it's in Blue Nile region, by the way, and in other parts. And sometimes this is done by force and intimidation to the communities, because in Sudan, in many parts, land is owned by communities, it's owned by tribes, it's owned by, it's not really owned by the government, unless in some strategic locations, the tribes, they give up their right to this land or property or whatever, and then the government compensates them for that. Okay, and this is basically in Khartoum. I mean, Khartoum is owned by 3 to 4 major groups, but then they gave up this land for the general good, as they call it. So the problem is at the time they had taken over a lot of lands. I mean, I talked to people in Blue Nile region, and they said that the RSF has taken over a lot of land for mining in different parts of the region. And in fact, in Khartoum, they were intimidating families to sell their homes. So especially in, for example, Jabra, which is a neighborhood in South Khartoum. So sometimes they just give you a lot of money that you can't refuse, and sometimes you really don't have a choice, you have to sell it to them. So, but I want to give 2 examples that are kind of connected to the conflict that is happening now. And I think right now I'm looking at them as like maybe drivers of the conflict, or part of the many reasons why this conflict happened, because this conflict is really, or this war is a result of many things, right? The first thing is, let's go a few months back when the late leader, I mean, he has now passed away, of the Jamhuriya tribe in Durman. So he had a clash with the RSF. What he said is, he told the RSF to get off this military land. Why? Because he said that he actually, like his tribe, okay, the tribe he represents, that he rules over, gave this particular land as a gift to the military during the Nimeri regime. And he said, we gave it to the military, not the RSF. So this created a lot of controversy. But I think at the time people just didn't take him seriously because he's a former Islamist, because also this, especially in Khartoum, it's a very urban community, so people don't really take this idea of tribes and tribal homelands very seriously. But then it was very interesting because this raised questions about who really owns land in Sudan, and this idea of like tribal or communal owned land. And it raised another question, is how is the RSF continuing to expand on military land, or quote unquote land granted by communities to the military? So this issue was unresolved, but I think it raised some tension, and with the RSF. So tension continued. So then a few days before the war, an RSF force drove to Merowe and stationed itself near the Merowe military airport. Merowe is in northern state bordering Egypt. And by the way, I think this is one of the main issues that really trigger the confrontations, okay? And perhaps they stationed themselves there for this purpose, to trigger this confrontation, right? But what's really interesting for me is that they stationed themselves on a farmland near the airport. So they didn't really enter the airport until the 15th, right? But first they stationed themselves on a farm that is neighboring to the airport. This farm belonged to a community leader. And this community leader, apparently what came out is that he had sold this farmland to the RSF in secrecy. And this again opened another conversation on whether they are allowed to buy this specific piece of land, because there is legislation against land in like sensitive areas or like military locations that, it's not as easy to sell it, and you need to basically involve the military or so on. But it also raised questions about regional dynamics, because for the first time in northern state, there was this conversation of this community leader represents a group that is not really indigenous to northern state. So this is not even their land in the first place, and they're here as guests basically. So it stirred trouble in a peaceful region. So like I said, the two examples that I gave really shows that land is really at the heart of this conflict, and it's at the heart of actually all the conflicts in Sudan. And the two incidents, whether the incident in Durman or Merowe, they definitely were some of the triggers that triggered this confrontation, or triggered or instigated basically a lot of debates that just were unsettled, and then they led to where we are today. Thank you.
Thank you, Reem. And I think, as somebody in the Q&A said, we could probably spend an hour or more just digging in on land, but you shed a lot of light on some of this, and also some of the incidents that we maybe didn't take as seriously before, but they were kind of signals as to some of the issues that are now driving the conflict. And I wanted to also go back to a comment that al-Adha made. In addition to land, he talked a lot about accountability, or the lack of accountability. We've discussed abuses, violence against civilians, both now and historically. We just did I think, over 20-year anniversary of the conflict in Darfur. What have we learned? What can you tell us now about existing efforts to document the abuses, and what are the options that the Sudanese people will have to hold all the combatants to account? Are there lessons that we can draw from the previous processes or peacekeeping efforts that we may do a better job of holding people accountable, abusers and combatants accountable this time?
Okay, well, regarding to the documentation process, there is a great local effort made by the youth in Sudan, but this effort it's need help from international community with a technical and logistical supports, and must be arguably, because now the war is very escalated and there is a very big mass of violation. We need to accelerate the way to support those youth group are working on documentation, because it is the best way that putting the first step forward to the accountability. And concerning to, I think the main interest to the peacemaking in Sudan, it is and must be the justice. It is the only interest that leading to us to a sustainable peace. And justice, especially the criminal justice, we need to bring all those whom involving on or have been involved on these crime things 2 or 3 decades back. We need to bring them on the account to be accounted or on the judiciary process for bringing the justice to the victims. And I think one of the lessons that we need to learn now, it is to avoid the approaches that we use it, especially our political power. We must be a little bit radical on a new vision for or new solution now. We need it because we don't need again like to compromise and to bring the criminal as a part of power again, as we did on 2019, because that constitution is legitimate, especially the RSF, and also let the Jonathan of the South to be a part of power, and the result was destroying the country. So we need to learn from this point, and from my point of view, I think we now, regardless anything, we need to go to establish a government that a technocrat, that including a technocrat, and also to take the political parties away from the transitional period, and let them to go to prepare themselves and to be ready for the election. But we need very arguably a government that led with some technocrat to at least to stabilize the situation of the war, and let and to provide the security, and then the other they work on the other issue that related to the next game, which is the election, because there is many segmentation that taking place within the political parties or political players in Sudan, and I think it is a little bit difficult now to bring all of them on one page, because every day there is a fragmentation that taking place, and it increase day by day wider. So we need, but the situation of Sudan, because it's not cannot allow for long time of negotiation that has been done in the period of the after the coup of the 25th of the October. And also we want to learn that the approaches that has been used for the peacemaking in Sudan in general, especially in the period of after the coup, it is not efficient, it is not suitable, maybe because it is delaying the things a lot, which create other problems. So we need to look for other approaches or models that can be suited to the case of Sudan. Also, we need like to consider well the issue of the victims of war, especially in Darfur, those whom now is still living on the camps, and some of them though are in the refugee camps in other neighbor country. So those are the real stockholders of peace. So we need to talk to them to
Yes.
take their views and to build on their views, not on the other that they are pretending they are representing them. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Abdullah. I fully agree. There's not going to be justice, and you're right. There's not going to be peace unless there's justice. And if we're not speaking to the victims, those who've been most affected by the conflict, and now that list has grown into the millions, but those who are the originally affected have never really been as central as they need to be. And when you talked about a new vision, I wanted to also turn to Hamid on this. You know, the civilian, non-state actors, whether victims, resistance committees, civil society, they often have been dismissed, you know, both in their criticism of the processes, just as we've heard again now, but also, you know, we see that the current discussions that are happening, you can't end a conflict without at some point speaking to the combatants. But it seems to be that, you know, as you highlighted earlier, a new vision for the way forward needs to speak to different people. We've sort of gone through this cycle that we've had now in this current round, some similar cycles for years. So what would you suggest as an alternative? What could work in terms of getting those civilian voices, civil society actors, victims, and others really heard and taken into account?
Sure. So I think we need to start, you know, by agreeing that, you know, we all, you know, people who are working on Sudan, particularly from the international community, that, you know, peacemaking efforts and any political process in Sudan needs to be biased towards civilian pro-democracy actors, and it needs to be centered around their demands and aspirations. This is where we should all start from. Obviously, looking at previous processes and what's happening now, I could continue to argue that ignoring this matter is a huge part of why the war is raging all over the country at the moment, and how the warring generals got legitimized in the first place. But that is not the point, nor it is the time for blame games, in my opinion. But I think it is high time to acknowledge all the mistakes that were committed previously with regard to sidelining civilians throughout the different processes, particularly grassroots groups and so on, and to quickly learn from these mistakes as we move forward. So Sudanese civilians need to be part of the designing of the prospective process, not an auxiliary just added at the end. And all efforts must now be focused on consulting these actors on what the process should look like and what the agenda should be, and so on. And I believe that empowering civilian voices would send a strong message to the warring parties that they will not get rewarded for their violence this time, not like the previous times, and so on. And honestly, if we're trying to think about what an alternative process would look like, and so on, I think the international community or the international initiatives, and by international I mean both regional and international, you know, there is no need to reinvent the wheel. There are a lot of lessons and a lot of visions offered out there. As Abdullah mentioned, there are so many local initiatives, particularly in Darfur, that were much more successful than the current international initiatives. So there's a lot happening inside Sudan that we could support and learn from and incorporate as part of a more holistic process that addresses the issue at large, and the approach to including civilian voices in the prospective political process must be flexible and transparent and innovative. And previous processes have lacked that. They have lacked transparency, they have lacked flexibility and innovation in so many ways. So that also, I think, needs to change as an alternative. And this is basically to allow non-conventional actors like the resistance committees and other grassroots groups to be part of the process. They cannot be accommodated in these traditional closed room approaches that have been dominating. And I think we need to collectively continue thinking about ways to incorporate civilian voices, both inside and outside Sudan now, the people who got displaced because of the war. But like I said, there are already so many ideas and initiatives happening on ground in Sudan. But I think when we think about, bringing civilians on board and civilian voices and so on, there's often an expectation that they should all come up with a unified and homogeneous vision. And I think that's wrong. We cannot have that on all levels in Sudan. There are numerous actors in Sudan from very diverse backgrounds, and they all have very valid and legitimate demands and agendas, and they all should be meaningfully accommodated, in my opinion. Also, I think there's often this excuse that the multiplicity of these visions of civilian actors is a problem. However, I don't know if any country where all civilians are in full agreement on all governance issues. I would be happy to be challenged, but I don't know if any country, particularly a democratic country, that has that. And if calling for having one voice, I think, if anything, that is undemocratic. What we need is basically an agreement on the core issues. But saying that, I think it's also important for us Sudanese civilians or Sudanese civilian actors to admit that there is a serious issue of unhealthy fragmentation and polarization amongst civilians across Sudan. And as Abdullah just mentioned, the situation does not allow us to have that anymore. So we certainly need to learn to accept and manage our differences in a better way and very quickly. The last point that I will speak about is that often when you speak to the international community about the inclusion of civilians, they keep on saying, the actors are so many, it's difficult to reach out to them. We don't know who represents who and which groups are legitimate and which groups are not, and so on. And to be very honest, I think that's a lazy excuse. For instance, to start with resistance committees, most of resistance committees have announced spokespersons like Muzna, who is on the panel today, and so many of the other resistance committees do have these structures, so it's easy to reach out to them. Similarly, trade unions have similar structures, and some of them actually have went through democratic elections processes and so on. Civil society groups as well are, well known. It's easy to reach out to them. Just a few days ago, 75 civil society organizations have signed a declaration of principles, which represents a good group to work with. It's traditional civil society actors and so on, but it's a good coalition. And there are so many ways, like I said, to reach out to grassroots groups like the resistance committees who have a spokesperson. And I think the difficulty of reaching out to these different actors to include them and so on should not stop mediators and facilitators of the different initiatives from reaching out to them. In all cases, this process will be very complex and very messy, but there is no way around it. And similarly, there are no easy fixes for Sudan's conflict, and that is a reality that we all need to work with, and so on. We'll stop here.
Thank you, Hamid. Really appreciate your insights there, and especially the point you're making that the expectation that all civilian actors, and civilian may be too big of a frame, but even civil society and activists and trade unions and others all speak with one voice is not realistic. And in fact, it's really the debate and it's the vibrancy of multiple voices and dissent that drives societies forward. But yes, agreement on core principles is vital, and values and core principles. And I think we're getting closer. I agree the document is quite helpful in at least articulating those principles. But, as we build on this vision, I think Abdullah said many things. On one, I would sort of want to dig into a little bit more, because I'm not sure if I 100% agree that what we need is to go back to a transitional government that then prepares for election. I think, yes, there's part of that, but I think there's maybe more we could talk about. What this experience is showing us is that, there's a little bit more that we can be focusing on below the contest for controlling Khartoum and Sudan. It's sort of very centralized politics that have really failed for 60 plus years. And so I want to turn to Muzna. She talked about the resistance committees and what they're doing locally, but maybe we could expand the question a bit. The resistance committees are playing such an important role on an alternative model for governance, really, at the local level. And how have you experienced this sort of more or less grassroots governance, and what is the future, and so what role do you think they can play in as we hopefully inshallah get to the point of building back a much better, stable and resilient Sudan?
Okay, I think despite the crisis resulting from this war, I think it's high time for grassroots groups like resistance committees to actually practice what they have been preaching. The whole political charters produced by resistance committees were revolving around the idea of grassroots governance and local governance. Let's take, for example, the Revolutionary Charter for Establishment of People's Authority. The building block of this charter was basically forming these local councils that will build up to state level councils or regional councils until we reach the parliament, with very specific tasks that enables local community from seizing their resources and then identifying their development needs and work based on that. So I think now, without planning for that, the resistance committees found themselves in a situation where I think so far they delivered a good model in governing themselves and in their communities. And also it's a good opportunity that they shifted away from the centralization of Khartoum, because also, let's be honest, resistance committees in Khartoum were the most present and not necessarily the most powerful, but they were more vocal and they had more opportunities. Now, many of the members of resistance committees who still remained in Sudan travel to these different states. They now manage to engage in conversations with their comrades, work with them, and actually see the essence of governing local communities and what type of what these actually local communities in the different Sudanese states can bring to the table away from Khartoum. So I believe that this is a very good opportunity to lead by example and to practice what you preach. However, I think that the resistance committees need to admit that they have specific tasks and roles that they need to perform in order to basically have a more solid role as a political actor, whether now or in the near future or post-war. Anyhow, whenever we are ready as Sudanese to start talking about governance issues and decide how we want to govern ourselves and our communities. I think it's very important for resistance committees to focus on the consolidation of their different structures. This includes, strengthening their organizations within their neighborhoods, but also within the different working places, because we don't just want to focus on resistance committees within the neighborhoods, but we also have models of resistance committees inside different governmental entities and within also the groups of workers and trade unions. So we want to make sure that they have solid structures and they are further organized. We also want to see the resistance committees going into elections for those who are not elected, because we have resistance committees that elected their executive offices and elected their representatives. And I would like to see more resistance committees, or all resistance committees all over Sudan doing this. And I think this is a very important stepping stone into moving to the creation or the elections that would lead to electing neighborhoods councils, local councils that levels up to state level councils, regional councils, and until we reach a legislative council, or let's call it a parliament. So also I think all these tasks need to be performed. And I think now also is a good opportunity. This might be contradictory for people who think that we are in state of war, but at least I think this state of war is not happening all over Sudan. And despite the challenges that face the relatively safe states, but I think we are given a time and a space that we did not ask for. So why not use this time and space that we might not find during our, striving in our daily lives. But I think also part of like a bigger plan for empowering the model of grassroots governance would be that we need to look into policies. These policies need to focus on provision of basic services of health and education. These policies need to focus on food security and food sovereignty. Also, these policies need to look into affordable housing, regulated local markets, and all other needs of development that any local community in Sudan could ask for. If we actually build our governance model on these different priorities, then I think that there is a good chance for the future of grassroots governance, whether through the resistance committees or other grassroots groups. Just building on what Awadullah said on engaging the stakeholders in peace processes, I think that's also an important element that resistance committees has tapped on in their different political visions, is that the peace processes in Sudan are inherently failing because they are not acknowledging the right audience. They're not engaging the stakeholders. And I also see a role for resistance committees now to at least try to save the situation in the states that are considered safe for now, because we know the danger of this war quickly and rapidly escalating into a civil war due to many reasons. So why not also try to engage in efforts to try to save the remaining communities from the possible danger of, sliding into this conflict and, ending up with a full-fledged civil war. I would say that the most important, or I say the most valuable lesson that we could get from this whole experience, and even for the future of grassroots governance, that not only we are going to have a role in recovery post-war, but also this is very important because it tackles one of the root causes of Sudan's governance crises, as I see it, which is the injustices of Sudan central governments. Governments in Sudan has always been central, and services has always been centralized. And I think this is one of the worst challenges that the Sudanese people face now, the realization that everything was centralized in Khartoum and everywhere else is deprived. So this is a very valuable lesson that will encourage us actually to spread the model of, ruling our own local communities, having federal model of governance. Thank you.
Thank you. That's fascinating, and I fully agree on the points you're raising, including the policy priorities. And if people have not seen the charters that you referred to, the charter that produced by the resistance committees, I would strongly suggest it is just an extremely impressive and inspiring document. But also in the question in the Q&A, there was a request for the recent statement of priorities or principles that was signed by 75 organizations. We could also, I think, if Timep, if you don't have that, I can forward it and hopefully post it on your site as well, or in this chat. But I want to turn to some of the questions that have come in, and let me just try to consolidate a couple of them, because I know that there's 20 or 30 now, and we can't do all of them in this next 15 minutes or even 10 minutes. So there's a number of questions about the failures of the political processes within the negotiated settlement of the conflict, about a lack of leverage. And so who has leverage? Who could bring a little bit more in terms of pressure to stop the conflict among international actors that isn't currently at the table, or how could that leverage be brought to bear more? There's a question, or a whole number of questions, that really relate to the international community, maybe how it's engaging, but also in some way not solving, but maybe even making the problem worse. And perhaps, I think if you look at the questions, it's probably better stated there, but I think you get what I mean, especially Hamid, I'd like you to take on that one. Maybe if Awad, Awadullah and Muzna, to look at the polarization in the resistance, is it still there, or is that something that's still an issue? Is there a need to be unified? I think you've commented on that, but it'd be worth talking about that. There was some polarization among them in the time of charters. And maybe there's a last question, if we could get, and these are all of you, please just take a couple of minutes on each one. The last one is really the intentions of RSF and Hemedti, and what is the end game, and so how could that be taken into account as we talk about ending the conflict? Maybe, and I would like Reem to take that one on. Maybe Reem, if you could start with that, and then we can go to Hamid to take on this questions of the international engagement and making things either better or worse.
Yes, I mean, I think just a reflection, we could see a very, I think, difficult Libya-like situation. And I think we're already seeing characteristics of that, where you have two governments in one state, or you have at least two not governments, because not providing services, but two ruling authorities in different parts, because we've already seen the RSF being very willing to establish some kind of governance in West Darfur, trying to also really show that they control territory in other parts of Western Sudan, and trying to really show that they are able to form some kind of authority there. And so my worry is that this could be as a new status quo for Sudan, where the previous status quo, it was just military dictatorship after military dictatorship. My worry is that this war will just drag on. Okay, it will become a war of attrition, and it's already becoming for SAF and for the central government. At some point, SAF is going to be very weak, and this is what we're seeing, that it will be very difficult for them to control a lot of territory. And this is where the RSF will have more room to grow and control territory. So people there will be basically just under its mercy, I would say. So this is my worry if the situation continues, and if the conflict continues. We're already seeing characteristics of this, but I think within just a few weeks, we could see more of this, especially right now, as the latest thing that I read is that the RSF is trying to get some kind of recognition to open the airport in West Darfur for, emergency and humanitarian needs and so on. But there you go, you have an airport. If you have the RSF controlling an airport, SAF controlling some airports, you already have a situation where, you have two governing entities within one state. Thank you.
And of course, the ability to export and continue the financing of the conflict. Maybe if we could turn to you, Hamid, to talk about the international engagement has been either constructive or not so much.
Sure. So honestly, the suggestion that, not very well, designed international engagement and intervention in Sudan has been harmful is quite, correct. We cannot say otherwise. Basically, like I suggested earlier, one of the reasons, there are so many reasons for why this war is taking place, both national and international and so on. But what is keeping the fighting on now is that both warring generals or leaders of both institutions have political ambitions. And these political ambitions were encouraged by the international community legitimizing them, giving them seats at the table in previous processes, and accepting them as good partners to work with during Sudan's transition. And this is basically what has nurtured and fueled their political interests. So that is one of the side effects of international community that was not very constructive, I would say. And I think we have seen many different diplomats acknowledge that they basically created monsters in some ways and so on, but you have not seen change in policy that responds to acknowledging these mistakes that were committed. So yes, I think in so many ways there has been a lot of harmful interventions, and this is why I think as we move forward, we really need a Sudanese-led process. The international community needs to take a bit of a step back and support initiatives and ideas that are suggested by Sudanese actors. But we cannot have the international community leading the process yet again and committing all these mistakes all over. One last point on leverage, so that you don't have to come back to me again. I think this is why I said coordination between different initiatives is very important. For instance, the US-Saudi current initiative, none of them has very strong leverage on both warring factions. Any initiative that does not include Egypt and the UAE is not going to succeed, because and the UAE specifically, and we can go back to the financial linkages that Reem mentioned earlier, particularly on the RSF side, but also on SAF side equally. So we need a coordination, we need a mechanism or an initiative that brings all actors on board, because those who have leverage also don't have the best interest at heart, I would say, towards the democratization agenda and so on. So we need a process that has some of the institutions that are more keen on democracy, but also have countries that have leverage, namely the Emirates and Egypt, as I mentioned, but also other regional countries.
Okay, thank you, Hamid. Very, very comprehensive, and thanks for bringing the leverage point. We have a minute or so. Maybe we'd wrap up with Muzna and Abdullah on the points on the resistance committees, whether their disunity is an issue, or whether or not they're clear in their vision, and maybe just your comments on that. I know it's a big issue.
Okay, shall I start? I really believe now that the sound of war is louder than any political polarization. At least people now are agreeing on the bare minimum, which is ending the war. But to be honest, I'll predict the polarization to rise to the surface again if the FFC decide in any way to join any type of negotiation or actually arrive at any political agreement or a new political process, or even a continuation of the framework agreement that was, halted by the war. Because until this moment, the polarization around the framework agreement and around the repeated political processes of FFC remains an issue within the resistance committees, but also widely amongst it's contested among Sudanese people. Regarding the coordination happening between different emergency rooms, actually emergency rooms established as normal. You would, a neighborhood would announce that they established their emergency rooms. Resistance committees, of course, have their own well-established coordination structures. They actually manage to allocate support or even like receive donations and funds, and then they just, based on needs, you would write a need report and then you will get the support based on that. My understanding is that Khartoum as a state had one bigger emergency room where they allocated all the resources and then divided them to the different resistance committees in the 3 cities, Khartoum, Bahri, and Durman, based on the need, and they would actually write a detailed report about everything they received and where did they spend it and so on. So I think coordination was never an issue for resistance committees. Also, clearly, resistance committees, especially outside Khartoum, managed to coordinate with many of other civil society initiatives that were existing already or emerged among the war, like Salama, Shari al-Hawadis, Hadrin, and so on. So I don't think coordination was never an issue for civil society in general.
Abdullah?
Okay, thank you. Concerning to the resistance committee, I think since the war escalated, I think they put all their differences back and they start working together with a new spirit and vision. So, and this was like a good momentum that led the resistance community to work together and to understand each other more. So, and the polarizations, I think I agree with what has been mentioned by Mudan, will come again on the surface when the political process by the FFC is start. So, but I think all the short journey of this war to the resistance committee, while they are working on the emergencies room, I think they learn a lot of lessons that how they are capable enough to work together. They expand their visions. They now become now they are realized more that they need to work together. These things, it's a very good lessons we need from the political parties to strengthen the being of the resistance committee is stronger and more powerful and more united. Unless they figure out this, because I see the resistance committee, it is not a choice. It is the only one that can let us to go forward in different part of our life, especially in this very critical area that we have in now.
Thank you. I know we were at time and maybe we're even a bit over time, but I just want to make one point in that, as we've learned about, there used to be all this criticism, the resistance committees are disorganized and they're flat and who do you talk to and all of that. There's a book that an author named Nicholas Talib wrote called Anti-Fragile. And he talked about systems that are not only resilient, but actually somehow strengthened by stress and trauma. They become stronger over time. I think resistance committees are not only a more appropriate way of governing, given the structure of Sudan and its very different issues across the country and the need to focus more on bottom up. But in some ways, this conflict has shown us the value of that structure in new ways, and it's also strengthened them. I don't want to underplay the trauma and the difficulty, the destruction, everything from the history of Sudan in libraries to people's houses and homes, people's lives. But in some way, we are learning, and we hopefully learn a better way forward. And those who I want to end by how I started. Those of you who've found yourselves in a very different role, sometimes overnight, having to pack, sometimes within hours, having to leave your home. Take care of yourself and also strengthen yourself, because you'll be needed hopefully in the near future. Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Reem, al-Adha, Hamid, and Muzna. I want to sincerely thank our panelists for such an excellent conversation at a really critical time, as well as our moderator, Majdi, for guiding the conversation so well. I'd also like to especially thank al-Adha for joining us on short notice when one of our panelists fell ill. I want to recognize that you've joined us from the ground in Darfur and with quite short notice. And each of our panelists have been affected one way or another by the conflict, which I think makes it so much more meaningful and important that your voices are heard. So truly, thank you all so very much. I want to mention as well that this conversation is part of a much larger body of work on and commitment to Sudan by Time Up, including on the resistance committees, on responsible international engagement, and a return to civilian rule. And I invite you to explore our work on timeup.org and to follow Time Up, as well as each of these excellent panelists that you've heard speak here today. So thank you so much to our audience for joining us and for making this event possible. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.